The Greek tragedy is one of the most well-known formats of both theater and general storytelling. Originating in you'll never guess where, but really finding its footing in Athens around the 5th century BCE, these stories are ones that enraptured people both then and today. They tackled really profound topics like fate, free will, what it means for a human to suffer, all in ways completely unseen at the time. Even with how old they are, they're still some of the most powerful, evocative stories out there, absolutely standing the test of time. Yeah, there are a lot of famous Greek tragedies. Oedipus Rex, Antigone, and Medea are among the most well-known, but personally, none of those are my favorite. Personally, my favorite Greek tragedy, out of all of them, is a little story called Sonic Adventure 2. No, I'm not kidding. Sonic Adventure 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. Not just mine, this game is super beloved and celebrated even a quarter century later. The gameplay is great, the music is unbelievable, but the thing that stuck with me and many others more than anything else is the story. In my opinion, Adventure 2 is one of the best stories in all of gaming. Quick side tangent before we get into things. Unfortunately, Sonic games of this era had a ton of localization issues, and Adventure 2 is no exception. This leads to problems where, for example, people talk over each other.
You're comparing yourself to me? Ha! You're not even good enough to be my fit. I'll make you eat those words.
Dialogue's written kind of weirdly at times. And the audio balance is just completely awful.
It was a Chaos Emerald, wasn't it?
If these problems have kept you from being able to enjoy the game's story, I would seriously recommend trying it with the original Japanese dialogue and the translation patch. I know that makes me sound like a weeb, but you have to trust me on this one. It's really good, it fixes it, okay? Okay? What I want to do today is give a side-by-side comparison of Sonic Adventure 2's story and that of a classic Greek tragedy to show you how similar they are. Greek tragedies are famous for a lot of things, one being their pretty consistent narrative structure and overarching themes. They tended to have pretty similar story elements to one another, to the point where nowadays they'd be on the same level as, well, you know.
You're not better than us!
My sweet-ass coat begs to differ.
Aristotle himself said that the quintessential Greek tragedy was Oedipus Rex, so that's the one we'll use to explain. Just a brief summary, going over important points as they come up. As for Sonic, well, at first there's no real resemblance at all. Sonic just kinda rocks up, deals with Gun for a bit, goes to fight Eggman, and then stops the Ark from crashing into the Earth. Shadow does die, which is sad, but that alone isn't enough to call the story a tragedy. It just seems like another adventure. Another Sonic adventure. But with one simple change of perspective, it all starts making sense. Sonic isn't the protagonist of Sonic Adventure 2. Bear with me. The protagonist of Sonic Adventure 2 is the other hedgehog on the cover of the game, the ultimate life form, Shadow the Hedgehog. Looking at the story of the game through Shadow's perspective, him being the protagonist, everything starts falling into place. Let's examine the game's story in direct comparison with Oedipus Rex, with Shadow as our tragic hero. I'll go through Adventure 2's story in chronological order, rather than the order it was shown in game, mostly just to make things easier in lieu of Shadow's frequent flashbacks and amnesia. First thing first, before anything else, let's talk about the heroes of these stories. Not Shadow and Oedipus specifically, but the archetype they follow, that of the tragic hero. Shadow the Hedgehog was created as a cure to all diseases by Professor Gerald Robotnik, with the main purpose of curing his granddaughter, Maria Robotnik, of a terminal illness called neuroimmunodeficiency syndrome. A being born of design and science rather than of chance, his purpose in existence was decided for him from the moment of his birth. Oedipus was born as the son of the king and queen of Thebes. Unfortunately, the monarchs had recently received a prophecy from an oracle. Their child is destined to slay his father and marry his mother. The tragic hero is one who's set apart from the average person by the circumstances of his birth. In Greek tragedies, this is usually due to being royalty, a noble of high stature, something like that. But in Adventure 2, one could almost look at Shadow as some sort of a demigod. An incredibly special and important being, created for greater things than he could ever imagine. The ones funding Gerald's research, a global government organization known as GUN, started to resent Gerald. Gerald had put up resistance with creating weapons, and had always had some sort of angle with his creations. The one time he created a being that could properly be called a weapon, the prototype for the ultimate life form, he created the Bio-Lizard, which soon grew too large and violent to control, needing to be sealed away. Gunn no longer trusted Gerald, and aimed to shut down the project completely. They raided the Ark, killing everyone on board. They were unable to capture Shadow due to Maria sacrificing herself to let him escape, telling him her final wish in the process. Ultimately, Shadow was captured by Gunn, sealed away deep in Prison Island, but it was too late. Professor Gerald had already tampered with his memories. Upon being woken up by Dr. Eggman, he began his plan to destroy the world. His memory of Maria's last wish was one of revenge on the people of the world, and for her sake,
I promise you, revenge!
In Oedipus Rex, Oedipus's parents, after learning of his fate, sent him to be killed. His parents gave him to one of their servants, who ultimately couldn't bring himself to kill the newborn. The servant gave the baby to a shepherd, who then gave the child to the king and queen of Corinth. Oedipus grew up to be a great warrior. In his young adulthood, he heard from an oracle who told him of a terrible fate. He is destined to slay his father and marry his mother. In a bid to avoid this, Oedipus leaves Corinth at once, wanting to do everything in his power to keep his parents safe. While aimlessly traveling, he encounters a noble lord and his band of servants. The servants shove him to the ground, making room for the noble's carriage, and in a fit of rage, Oedipus slays the entire party. I'm sure you, the viewer at home, can already piece together the true identity of the noble lord. Oedipus, ignorant, continues his travels. In both stories, we see what's known as hamartia. Hamartia is colloquially known as the hero's tragic flaw or tragic error. It consists of the hero, in a combination of ignorance, hubris, and trying to do the right thing, sealing their own downfall by their own hands. It's not the first domino that falls in the hero's downfall, but it's the first domino that they have control over. Shadow, believing both that Maria's true wish was humanity's downfall, ignorance, and believing himself to be above humanity and that humans deserve to be destroyed, hubris, starts to enact his plan to destroy humanity using the Eclipse Cannon. Oedipus, believing that the king and queen of Corinth, not Thebes, are his true parents, leaves Corinth, leading to him meeting his true father in the first place. In an act of hubris and rage, he kills his father, sealing the destiny of killing his own father, not by the gods making it happen, but by his own volition. Upon being woken up by Eggman, Shadow immediately forms an alliance with him, convincing the Doctor that'll help him take over the world. From here, Shadow spends the majority of the game continuing with this plan. He tells Eggman to meet him at the Ark, planting the seeds for Eggman to try to use the Eclipse Cannon to take over the world, which of course Shadow plans to hijack to destroy the world. Shadow steals a Chaos Emerald, and in his escape from Gun's pursuit runs into Sonic the Hedgehog before continuing on through Radical Highway. He plays along with Eggman's delusion of being the mastermind, letting him think that he's in control. Shadow steals the Chaos Emeralds from Prison Island, destroying it in their wake, barely saving Rouge at the end of White Jungle. He helps chase down Tails and Skyrail, both in an effort to locate the last Chaos Emerald and to inform Eggman that his base has been discovered. All the while, though, he's been suffering from internal turmoil. In his mind, he keeps seeing flashes of Maria. When he rescues Rouge, she confronts him with that act of kindness, and he just forces himself to brush it off. Despite everything, he is convinced that his path is true, that he's doing what he should be doing. That is, up until the moment he's at his most confident. After witnessing what could only be described as the murder of Sonic the Hedgehog, Shadow catches Rouge meddling with the Eclipse Cannon's controls. They argue back and forth for a moment, but then Rouge reveals something she's learned in her research. She shows him evidence of the Bio-Lizard, something that he had no knowledge of, and confronts him with the core of the issue. Can Shadow know for certain that he's really Shadow? Can he know for certain that his memories are true? Can he know that this whole time he has really been doing the right thing? At first, he doesn't waver. He says that he is Shadow.
No doubt.
But within moments, his tone softens. You can tell he can't just brush off what Rouge is saying the way he did before. Eggman interrupts, telling him to intercept an intruder on their way to stop the Eclipse Cannon, sending Shadow into even more of a panic. He can't stop and think about things. He can't be certain of the truth. All he can do is what he thinks Maria would have wanted, even if he can't even be sure that's true. Oedipus, after killing the noble, makes his way to Thebes, where they're suffering from the threat of a great monster known as the Sphinx. Their king had just been killed, so it was decided that whoever slays the Sphinx would get to be the new king, taking the hand of the widowed queen in marriage. Oedipus, thinking that if he wins, he gets to help people, and if he loses, the prophecy goes unfulfilled, goes to defeat the Sphinx. Ultimately, Oedipus wins, becoming the new king of Thebes and marrying the widowed queen. Years later, a plague is ravaging Thebes, and Oedipus is trying to find a way to stop it. He comes to learn that the plague was a curse brought by the god Apollo as a punishment for the slaying of the previous king going unpunished. It would continue until the true killer was found and brought to justice. Oedipus, desperate to find the truth, seeks the guidance of a nearby prophet. At first, the prophet hesitates, but upon being pressed by Oedipus, reveals that Oedipus is the killer. Not believing the oracle, Oedipus casts him out from the castle. Continuing in his search, he is interrupted by a messenger from Corinth, who tells Oedipus that the king of Corinth had died and begged Oedipus to return and reclaim the throne. Oedipus lets out a sigh of relief, admitting he was glad the king died, because that meant the prophecy wasn't true, because he hadn't killed the king, he hadn't killed his father. The messenger then tells Oedipus that he was actually adopted, having been brought to the king by a shepherd from Thebes. Here, we see another archetype present in both stories, that of the messenger. In Greek tragedies, there's often a messenger who shows up in the middle of the story to present the characters with information, both the things that happen off-screen during the events of the story, and things that specifically put into question whether the hero was acting in defiance of his fate or directly following it. It's never enough to fully convince the hero that he's been led astray. It's just enough to cast doubt into his heart. And for the record, nowadays, having some guy just rock up and tell the main character stuff to move the plot forward would definitely be seen as lazy writing, but it was an incredibly common feature of Greek tragedies. Shadow, determined to do what he needs to do, despite his doubt, continues on. He runs into Sonic, expressing surprise at Sonic's survival, exchanging a few words, and of course, getting the shit beaten out of him. Despite this, even though Sonic beat Shadow and successfully swapped the real emerald with the fake one, Shadow's plan continues, due to the contingency plan Gerald pre-programmed in the Ark, its collision course with Earth. Learning of this, everyone puts aside their differences to try and save the world. Led by Sonic and Eggman, they all put in an effort to do what they can. Except, of course, for Shadow. This was his plan after all. He stands at the edge of the arc, gazing over the earth, brooding over his life, what he's done so far, and the success of his plan. He's spotted by Amy Rose, who once again has been left out of the action, doing not only the only thing she can do, but also the one thing she's best at. She walks up to Shadow and talks to him. She pleads for him to save the world, appealing to the kindness and light in his heart that she knows is there, begging him to work together with everyone else to stop the calamity. Amy's words trigger a memory of Maria's true wish. In a sudden flash, Shadow realizes everything he's been doing up until now was wrong. He realizes a critical error only now, at the 11th hour. Oedipus, learning that the king of Corinth wasn't his true father, orders the shepherd who brought him to the king in the first place be brought before him. He speaks fiercely with the shepherd, demanding that he reveals the identity of his true parents, despite the shepherd's hesitation. After being insulted and threatened, the shepherd tells Oedipus that his true parents were the king and queen of Thebes all along. In this moment, Oedipus is horrified. His entire world crumbles around him. The noble that Oedipus had killed all those years ago was his father. This whole time, the killer he was searching for was himself. The woman he'd married and raised children with was his mother. His righteous fury and search for the truth led to him learning that he was the source of the plague, and the prophecy had already been fulfilled. In these moments of realization, two big elements of Greek tragedies occur essentially at the same time: peripedia and anagnorisis. Peripedia is a sudden reversal, an immediate shift from stability to disaster. Usually, it occurs when the hero's actions, done in good faith, backfire drastically, leading to the hero's downfall. In Shadow's case, it's the revelation that everything he had been doing had been going against Maria's wish. By trying to enact revenge for her, he was the one doing the thing that would have broken her heart the most. In Oedipus's case, it's the revelation that everything he had done was ultimately in accordance with the prophecy. He did kill his father, and he did marry his mother. He was no righteous king seeking justice that the world thought he was. He was just another pawn, acting in accordance to destiny. In both cases, the sudden shift is sudden not due to the circumstances around the character changing suddenly, but the context in which those circumstances exist changing suddenly. It's not the hero's realization, but the manner in which this realization changes the context of the hero's actions. Anagnorisis is the hero's moment of critical awareness. This is the hero learning the truth of the one thing that's been motivating them down their path, and how it's led them to their downfall. This is more directly the realization itself, and how it directly affects the hero's mindset. In Shadow's case, it's his realization of what Maria's true wish was, and that his belief of what her wish was wrong the whole time. In Oedipus's case, it's his realization that his actions, with the intent of avoiding the prophecy, were the direct cause of the fulfillment of the prophecy. In both cases, this realization horrifies them, causing both of them to take drastic action in hopes of making things right, at least as right as they can. Shadow, now knowing the truth of who he really is and what Maria really wanted, rushes to the cannon's core. He helps Sonic, both by taking care of the Bio-Lizard the first time, and in helping him fight the final hazard together. The two of them, still needing to stop the Ark's collision course even after defeating the final hazard, work together to warp it away. Shadow, knowing he'll need to use all of his power, removes his inhibitor rings. The pair of heroes use Chaos Control to warp the Ark away. In doing so, Shadow spends all of his energy, leaving himself with nothing. Unable to even move, he falls to Earth, seemingly dying. In order to fulfill his wish to Maria, he sacrifices himself, in the end still happy knowing that he did what he could to keep his promise. And that's where his story ends, at least until Sonic Heroes. Oedipus, after learning the truth of his lineage, returns to his chambers, where he finds his wife, his mother, hanging. She had already realized the truth of it all. Oedipus, horrified, drives pins into his eyes, blinding himself. In accordance with his decree, he banishes himself. At the very least, this way, he can save his people from the plague, and maintain order in Thebes by accepting the punishment meant for the previous king's killer. And that's where his story ends, at least until Antigone. With these sacrifices, we can see the last major element of the Greek tragedy, catharsis. Catharsis in a Greek tragedy is when the tragic hero meets his tragic fate. He has no choice but to face what he's done, and do what must be done as a result of that. This is also important in letting the audience feel pity and sympathy for the hero. It forces them to grapple with the fate of a man who committed grave errors, but only due to ignorance in his humanity, not out of any vice. It's often said that one of the most important parts of Greek tragedy is that these things could happen to anyone, not just the wicked. Alright, so those are all the major narrative elements and story beats that overlap. With that said, there are still quite a few overarching story themes that are equally as important and present in both Sonic Adventure 2 and Oedipus Rex. The first is overarching elements of divinity throughout the story. In Oedipus Rex, it's really clear. The plague in Thebes was directly caused by Apollo. Sometimes the gods in these stories take these kind of smaller, indirect roles, but it ranges. For example, in The Bouquet, the main antagonist of the entire story is Dionysus, who plays an active role throughout. Where is divinity in Sonic Adventure 2, I hear you ask? Okay, this is gonna be a stretch, but you gotta hear me out. The first is Shadow again, with the circumstances of its birth. He wasn't born, he was created, with immense power given to him as a birthright, designed to use that power to have great impact over humanity at large, in Shadow's case for curing diseases. That sounds an awful lot like a demigod or something to me. The second, and the one that I think is a lot more interesting, is Sonic himself. Really, think about it from Shadow's perspective. Sonic is the only being able to keep up with Shadow's speed. He was able to perform Chaos Control after only seeing it once, not even using a real emerald. He consistently shows up everywhere, solely to interfere with Shadow's plan. Hell, even in the last story, Sonic is able to transform into Super Sonic and show Shadow how to transform into his super form. For us, that's normal and makes total sense, we've seen it before, but for Shadow, he has no clue what's going on. He spent his entire life on the Ark until then. There's no way for him to have even heard of a super form, and here's Sonic doing it casually, summoning these godlike powers from the mystical stones as though it's nothing. If you look at it from that perspective, Sonic would be pretty equivalent to some sort of divine being. The second major theme is that of fate and free will. In both stories, our heroes make an active effort to forge their own path, but in doing so, fall directly into the fates that have been given to him by greater beings. In Shadow's case, while he believes he's acting of his own free will to honor Maria's last wish, he's being controlled by Gerald from beyond the grave the entire time. Shadow basically spends the entire game fighting between the fate Gerald ordained upon him and the one he wanted to create for himself, by his own hands. At the end, he manages to break free, sacrificing himself in the purest act of free will there is. In Oedipus's case, while he's actively going out of his way to avoid the prophecy, it's by his own hands that he meets his fate. His fate was sealed from the moment he was born, and any struggle against it was all for naught. In Greek tragedies, it's not like every single one of them says that fate trumps free will, or free will trumps fate. It varies a lot depending on the work. Oedipus Rex says that fate will win out, and Adventure 2 claims that free will does. In both cases, it's a major theme of the story, where the main character's struggle is one of the driving forces for everything the hero does. The third major theme is the search for truth, and the pain that brings. In Shadow's case, this is really obvious. He spends a lot of the game grappling with his identity, trying to figure out who he really is and what his real memories are. When he finally figures it out, the pain of that knowledge is not from the truth, but how that knowledge recontextualizes everything he did so far. In Oedipus's case, Oedipus spends a majority of the story trying to figure out who his real parents are, despite everyone equipped to help him begging him to reconsider, hoping that he stays in the dark. The prophet who told Oedipus that he killed his father, he only answered when pushed. Same with the shepherd at the end. Whether or not this pain means that it's not worth it knowing the truth and that it's better to live in ignorance, that's up to the audience. Usually, the theme is that the truth is painful, but ultimately necessary for doing the right thing, no matter how much it hurts. It's not just a matter of truth being painful, but trying to do everything despite the pain, despite everything. The last major theme is the hero's moral ambiguity and hubris. Tragic heroes aren't just good guys, they're really complex, and often don't do the right thing, either out of a sense of moral superiority, or because they have a reason they believe justifies it. In Shadow's case, his hubris comes from his genuine belief that humans are worthless and deserves to be culled, and he's deserving to cull them. He's doing something bad and causing a calamity, but he's doing it for the sake of honoring the wish of the person he loved most, doing it out of pain for what he's lost, and doing it because he believes it to be the right thing. In Oedipus's case, he has clear signs of hubris and moral ambiguity. For one, he thinks it's justified to kill his father and the servants for the crime of being pushed to the ground. In the second half of the story, he constantly lashes out at characters like the Prophet, other characters we didn't have time to cover like his brother-in-law, all because they were hesitant to tell him the truth. He's ultimately trying to do the right thing and keeping his parents safe, but even then, even putting his ignorance of the truth aside, he still isn't always the best person. That about sums up all the overarching themes. I spent a lot of time showing the similarities between Sonic Adventure 2 and Oedipus Rex, which again is a quintessential Greek tragedy. With that said, it's only fair if I go over the things that they don't have in common too. The first and the most obvious is its presentation. It's not a play, it's a video game. The characters don't speak in iambic triameter, the written structure isn't a simple 3-act with interruptions in the chorus. Alright, the chorus. You see, in ancient Greek tragedies, there was often a chorus, a choir, who would not only sing songs, but would directly speak with the characters on stage, talking back and forth with them. We don't have one of those in Sonic Adventure 2. But like, imagine. Those are the obvious ones. Sonic Adventure 2 is a game, not a play. Of course it won't have theater elements to it. But even in the story itself, there are quite a few things that would hurt this interpretation. Let's start with the things that I mentioned earlier that I said were a bit of a stretch. I know I mentioned them briefly before, but I'd like to flesh it out more here. Namely, the role of divinity, both in the context of Gerald and Shadow, and in that of Sonic. Obviously, neither of these are literally divine beings. Certainly, you can interpret their actions and their roles in the story as metaphors or stand-ins for some sort of a god, but you could also just interpret it straight. And then, they're not. In Greek tragedies, there was no interpretation of the text like that. If Zeus was there, he's a god. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. That said, the only gods in the entire Sonic franchise at this point, especially at this point in time, it was It was just chaos. I'm pretty sure it was just chaos. And it would be weird for him to come back when he literally died at the end of Adventure 1. So it's not like there are any gods for them to use if they wanted to have gods in the story. Unless they, like, made up new ones for this game. That's about it for the story elements that don't quite fit, but there are still some narrative themes that are entirely absent from the game. Of course, it's ridiculous to expect every single work in a genre to touch on every single theme prevalent in the genre, but still, it's worth going over, especially since in the majority of Greek tragedies, these themes are usually present, usually in the spotlight even. The first major theme is that of political conflict. While one could argue that Eggman threatening the president might count, that's too much of a stretch. Even for me, that's too much of a stretch. In Oedipus Rex, there was a whole thing of Oedipus taking the throne in Thebes, the issue in Corinth after his father died, and while those aren't necessarily huge examples, other tragedies such as Antigone's and the Seven Against Thebes have this theme as one of the major points of the story. The second major theme that doesn't really come up in Adventure 2 is that of suffering in the human condition. Basically, the idea that to live is inherently to suffer, that by being alive, suffering is inevitable. One could make an argument of that from Shadow's perspective with Maria's death, the raid on the Ark, but that seems less like an inevitability of life and more just like a freak tragedy that happened in his past. The biggest thing, though, is the fact that the entire argument is being made on the basis that Shadow is the protagonist of the game, not Sonic. Personally, I do believe Shadow is the protagonist, but I'll admit I am very biased. I mean, the first character you see in the intro is Shadow, and they did design the final boss so that if you don't miss any hits, Shadow gets the final hit and victory quote, and the entire game is about his story to the point where you see his entire life from start to finish. But that's besides the point. I'm sure if you ask most people who played the game, they would tell you that Sonic is the protagonist, and Shadow is a sympathetic antagonist who ends up switching sides at the end. Kinda like Zuko in Avatar The Last Airbender, who's definitely more interesting than Aang, but he's certainly not the main hero, the protagonist. Overall, do I think that Sega wrote this game with the specific intention of it being a Greek tragedy? No, of course not. They just wanted to tell a good story, and a good story they did tell. Something, this might have been the last Sonic game if it sold poorly. You've heard it all before. The reason I made this video wasn't to, like, convince you that Sonic Adventure 2 was written to be a Greek tragedy or anything. It's mostly just because I thought it was really interesting to see how well the game's story maps onto the general plot structure of Greek tragedies. The narrative elements, the general plot structure, the overarching themes, I'm just really impressed at how well that stood the test of time to the point where even now, it can still tell evocative, meaningful stories thousands of years later. Wait, does Black Doom count as a god? Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, and you also want to help the algorithm spread it around more, which comes back to me in a very big way, please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. And also leave a comment if you like this sort of content, and also with your thoughts on the video, if you agree or disagree with the premise and the points that I made, or anything at all, really. I read every comment. I try to. Even if I don't respond to all of them, I do read them. So, yeah, if there's anything you want me to see, just leave a comment. I will get to it. I will see it. Alright, that's all for this time. Hope you all have a great day. Bye.